All right, one more conceptual aside. Remember, we already said that TCP splits up the information we're trying to send and sends it across the internet, essentially, in packets. That's the idea, the protocol, that the two sides agree to receive information in packets as defined by TCP. But what about that information itself? How is the information structured when you put all those packets back together? Let's talk about HTTP. Big word alert. HTTP. That's just a set of rules, a format for data that's being transferred on the web. It stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it's one of various formats that define data being transferred via TCP/IP. So, data defined within the set of rules for how to format an HTTP request or an HTTP response is then split into packets as defined by TCP. But the idea is simply that this is how we format our message. It's kind of like saying, I'm going to write you a business letter. And you may have learned in school that a business letter you format in a particular way as far as where you put the address, whose address it is, where and from, how you begin it, how you end it. In a similar way, HTTP is just a set of rules that says, here's all of the things the message can contain, here's how it's structured, here's where you put these pieces of data, and here's all the kinds of data that you can define. And HTTP is used not just to send hypertext, that is HTML, but lots of information like JavaScript files and images and other things. It's the core of how we send information on the World Wide Web. Web pages, web applications, and images, CSS files, JavaScript files, etc. So what happens is the browser and the web server have this request and response. And we already said this was the client-server model. But the format of the information actually being sent is defined then by HTTP, a protocol, a set of rules. This is an example of an HTTP request, a very simplified example, where we say, here's the information I'm looking for, here's the port so that we know which program should receive this information, and a couple of other things. And in general, there are what's called headers, which are just name-value pairs separated by a colon. So the host or the connection is the name, and then the value is google.com or keep alive. And there are standards as far as what this actually means, and the server and the browser understand what all of these different possible values mean. This is an example of an HTTP response, what comes back from the server after a request. And it's just information split up in a specific format, a protocol, that both the browser and the server are programmed to understand. So there's the first line, which is a status, which specifies, hey, did this all go well on the server, or was there a problem of some sort, or some other information about this response that you should know? There are headers, which are just name-value pairs separated by colons. And then there's a space and a body. Now here we're showing some HTML, which is very common, but it could also be the data that defines an image, JSON data, a JavaScript file, a CSS file, whatever we're sending across the internet, defined by the HTTP concept, that protocol. And then, for example, one thing to note is the content type, which is something called a MIME type. Big word alert. A MIME type. This is a standard for specifying the type of data being sent. MIME stands for Multi-Purpose Internet Mail Extensions. It was originally designed to help us specify how we send attachments in email, what kind of data we were sending in attachments. But HTTP has adopted it as well as a way of specifying the kind of information being sent with any particular HTTP response. So some examples are application/JSON, meaning I'm sending you JSON data, text/HTML, meaning I'm sending you some HTML, image/JPEG, meaning I'm sending you a JPEG image, and lots of others. And the idea is that the server and the browser understand what a MIME type is, and then is coded to treat each particular MIME type a certain way. If the browser, for example, sees an image MIME type, it knows you are sending an image and should display it. If it sees that you're sending HTML, then it knows that it should process the HTML and render a web page, etc. And this is just part of HTTP. And then when we're sending data then from Node, we can specify the MIME type. We can say, I'm about to send this kind of data. That way, whoever's receiving the data, the browser usually, will be able to interpret it properly. All right, so that's the basic idea of HTTP, both requests and response, and MIME types. That's general, but we'll see specific examples of this as we work with Node.js.